Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. All the characters in the story who enter into intimate relationships are over 18 years old. I got married when I was 17 and Steve was 22. Now our 12-year marriage is over. I cheated on my husband. It was an old story. I was out of town on the East Coast doing my job training. The classes lasted 6 weeks. I'm 29 now, so it wasn't surprising that everyone in the class was actively communicating with me. Men did this all the time, and some women too. One of the guys, Mark, a classic stocky, tanned, fit alpha male, caught my attention. On the first day of class, we split into teams of 2, and he came straight to me to ask me to be his partner. I said yes. I admit it. I liked him. From the very beginning, I felt comfortable with him. He wasn't as handsome as my husband Steve. He wasn't in as good shape as Steve. He was older than Steve. He was in his early 40s. So what was it that made me like him so much and so quickly? I don't know. I can't explain it. But I was looking forward to spending every day with him. The time we spent in class quickly turned into joint trips to dinner, either with the whole class, the whole group, or just him and me, alone. Have a drink or two and dance a little. I had so much fun with him. I felt so relaxed and at ease with him. But we had nothing. Oh, of course I've thought about it. And who doesn't think? Every evening he accompanied me to my room. We hugged and went to our rooms. In just 2 days, I began to consider him a very dear friend. That's how quickly my feelings for him developed. But none of that justifies what I did. I take full responsibility for making love to him. On the last night of class, after dinner, he put his arm around my shoulders for the first time as we walked back to the hotel. And I came close to him and put my arm around his waist. That's how we got back to the hotel. It just seemed so natural. At the door to my room, I found myself holding his hand and inviting him into my room, into my bed and into my arms. I knew it was wrong. I didn't fully understand why I was doing this. I didn't even drink anything that night. But I did it. I deliberately cheated on my husband. I told myself it would only be once, and no one would ever know. No one will get hurt. At that moment, I wanted to be with Mark, and it was stronger than my decency and loyalty to Steve. That was all that was needed. A chance opportunity and a bit of rationalization. That was all it took for me to do what I knew was wrong. Mark was nice. He was much better in bed than with her husband. Add to this the thrill of novelty. As for making love, all I will say is that in terms of size, Mark was somewhat less gifted than Steve. So no, it wasn't that he was in any way better or worse physically than Steve. But making love with Mark was more fun. No, it was joyful and wonderful. He made me have fun 4 times. I've never experienced this with my husband when we made love. No matter how pleasant the evening was, it wasn't worth the pain that followed. I wish things were different. But what was done was done. The next morning, the rising sun brought with it a sense of guilt. Guilt hit me like a sledgehammer to the head. The guilt of betraying my husband. The guilt that I didn't know if Mark was married and had just dealt a fatal blow to his marriage. Even the guilt of pleasure. I couldn't bear to look at myself in the mirror. Mark left early, and I never saw him again. All that day it seemed to me that I was moving through a thick fog. I do not know how I managed to find the airport in my flight. Steve met me on arrival. I put on a bright smile and a joyful, enthusiastic welcome hug. Jesus, Sarah, you look terrible. These were Steve's first words to me. We have to get you out of here. I don't want anyone to see you and me like this. Did you sleep in these clothes? We grabbed my bags and headed home. I managed to keep from crying the whole way. But when we got to the house, I almost lost my temper. And when I walked through the front door, I was really lost. I dropped my carry-on and purse and just started crying. Steve, I have to tell you, everything went as badly as you can imagine. He completely exploded. He called me a fool, a slut, a dog in heat, and almost every other derogatory name you can think of. He asked me if I had my period. So that's why I did it anyway? Then he began to wonder if I was telling him the whole truth. But was it only once? Sarah? He said. How should I know? I can't believe you're saying this, Steve. Of course, this is the only time. I told you about it. If I hadn't said anything, you would never have known. What does he have that I don't? Was he good in bed? Did he have a bigger bolt than me? Was he prettier? What exactly was it about him that I don't have that made you flush 12 years of marriage down the toilet? I don't know, but by this time I already knew. On the plane, I realized what it was about Mark that made me renounce my marriage vows. He was funny. I felt good and relaxed with him. He was much more attentive in bed than Steve had ever been, but I knew Steve would kick me out the door if I said all this. I want to get a divorce. Steve, why? I made a mistake. I admit it. I take full responsibility for this. I'll do anything to fix it, I swear. I'm not interested anymore. I just can't believe you did that. Why? What does he have that I don't? Oh my God. I was tempted to tell him. Spit it out in his face. But I held back. I don't know. However, Steve wasn't done yet. Am I not good enough for you? He demanded an answer again. My God. What will all our friends and relatives think when we get divorced? Do you know what I'll look like? Everyone will know that we weren't a perfect couple. Does it really mean that much to you? Yes. God, how do you think we got to where we are? Because I've worked hard to make our relationship perfect and keep it perfect. No, it's all on your conscience. I'll tell everyone that you cheated on me, so at least I'll keep my reputation. Steve, I said pleadingly, can't you at least sleep on this for one night? I told you, and in less than 5 minutes, you're already talking about a divorce? You're damn right it is. So it's just like that? Don't you love me anymore? No. Can I earn your trust and love again? Can you forgive me? I'll do anything to fix it. I can't forgive you when I don't know why you did it, because I don't know what I forgive. I don't want to see your face anymore. We're done. Why? I shouted. Because we had a perfect marriage, and obviously it wasn't enough for you. And you cheated on me. You can't tell me why you did it. Therefore, it cannot be argued that this will never happen again. Even worse, if you don't know why you changed it, then there is a high probability that whatever set of conditions caused it, it still exists. And that means you can change again. So, no thanks, I don't want my heart to be cut out a second time. But we know that this will not happen. Do we know? Fuck you, Sarah. Yes, I knew that you would never cheat on me. You haven't done that yet. So, we don't know that it won't happen again. I feel like I can't trust you or anything you say, and I won't be able to live in this uncertainty. And I certainly won't let your lecherous behavior affect my reputation in the eyes of society. Steve, this could be anyone's story, not just ours. It's happened to a lot of couples, and they've been through it. This is nothing more than the same risk you would take with anyone you could marry. It's just life, and sometimes we have to put up with the terrible shit she throws at us. Steve, I swear to God, I'll make it up to you if you let me. It wasn't some kind of cataclysm. It was you who stabbed us in the back with your little mistake. And this is a risk that I do not intend to expose myself to a second time. You can't be serious. We wanted to have children. Well, they wanted to. Are you going to throw this away because I cheated once? Don't you want to have children? Become a father? If it was you who cheated, I would forgive you under such circumstances. I would try to figure it out. Figure out where we went wrong and try to fix it. No. It wasn't we who made a mistake. It was you who threw everything away, and there is a risk that you can do it again. But I won't do it. We've already talked about this. You've already sworn once. Your words are not enough. I was suddenly filled with blind rage. Damn you, Steve. Do you think you've figured it all out already? Are you going to throw away all our time together and the family we could have created just for once? Because you're primarily worried about how you'll look in society? And then he started saying unforgivable things. Damn you, Sarah. We had everything. We had such a wonderful life. All our friends were jealous of us. And you go and ruin our marriage, and you can't even tell me why? You know damn well why you did it. You wanted it yourself. You were open, tempted, thought you wouldn't get caught, and thought it would be fun. You ruined our life that could have been. And you can't even tell me why. So fuck you if you think I'm going to sign up for a sequel. And then he said it. The worst thing that ever happened. Thank God, we don't have children yet. Thank God it happened before we got anywhere. In that sense, being a fool was a blessing. So thank you, Sarah. I couldn't stand it. You know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe my deception was a blessing in disguise. Do you want to know why I slept with him? He made me feel good. It was fun with him. I could talk to him without my words being critically evaluated and dissected. And that was before I slept with him. And you know what else? He was better in bed than you. He cared enough to make it good for both of us. So what if my fooling around makes you leave so I can find a better man? It was a blessing then, and I thank God for that. Well, good news. You're starting to weed out the candidates. He left the house that night. We never spoke again except through our lawyers, and when the divorce was settled, he left the state and didn't tell me where he moved to. His threat to tell everyone that it was all my fault? It turned out that it was just a threat. He didn't tell anyone we knew, not our neighbors, not our friends. Did he just not see the point in it? Or could he not allow himself to be looked at as a person who had been cheated on? For the next 3 months, I went to bed every night, dreaming of just dying in my sleep. And in the morning, when the sun rose again, it lifted me up, kicking, screaming, and not wanting to live. It just kept going on, no matter what was going on, what we were doing, or how we might feel about it. I was doing my job on autopilot. I spent dinners at my desk in my office with the door closed, just crying my eyes out. But it's impossible to cry forever. All sorts of shit happens, often significantly exceeding the possibilities. But life goes on. When my grief over what I had done passed, when my grief for my lost husband, my ruined marriage, my missed chance at a family and a wonderful life passed, I began to return to my usual self. Well, I'll always mourn what I've lost. And for the way I lost it, for the way Steve and I both lost it. But eventually I learned to control myself in public. I began to rejoice when I saw the sunrise again. I started looking at men again. A few years later, I learned from his mother that Steve had begun to lose his strength. It became almost impossible to work with him. He was intolerant of any mistake or incident. He ate into any project at work to the point that the project was paralyzed. Then he made a series of disastrous decisions at work that cost the company millions. He was fired. He never married again. He became an alcoholic. Having no job and spending all his money on cheap whiskey, he lost his accounts, and the bank seized his house. On the day he was evicted, he ran out into the roadway and threw himself under a large truck. It seemed like he couldn't even forgive himself, let alone anyone else. I cried for several days. It was like losing him, losing your marriage, all over again. It could have been very different. Things could have been much better. By making the wrong decision, I put our marriage and our lives at risk. It was 100% my fault, forever. But Steve ruined our marriage and his life because of his absolute unwillingness to forgive, and because he was more concerned about his image in the eyes of all other people on earth except us. I even cried more because of all this. In the days and weeks that followed, our story became known to all our friends and neighbors. I wasn't going to lie about anything, not about myself or Steve. Several friends accused me and never spoke to me again. But the big surprise for me was how many of our neighbors and friends remained friends with me. They all told me the same thing. They never liked Steve. He was too much of a look how perfect I am braggart. He was always quick to point out what he thought was wrong with everything our friends and neighbors were doing. Everyone we knew mostly talked to us just because they liked me. Most of our friends told Steve good riddance, and that I was better off without him. One of my biggest supporters was my mother-in-law. She came to the house demanding an explanation. Steve, her own son, did not tell her why his marriage broke up. I told her everything. When I finished, she came up to me and slapped me in the face. "This is for cheating on my son." Then she hugged me tightly and said, "That's for getting rid of him. You're lucky. I'm sorry I didn't raise a better man for you." We hugged each other and cried for over an hour. Tears were my most frequent companion in the days and weeks that followed. I had a lot to cry about, but soon enough, these tears dried up. Time heals all wounds. A few years passed, and I got married again and was happy. I had a little boy and a girl. I've never cheated on my new husband. But on the other hand, I never loved my first husband, Steve, the way I love my second husband, Fred. This time, being older and wiser, I chose a man with whom I felt good, as I once did with Mark. A man who didn't have a perfection complex. They say that everything happens for a reason. I don't know anything about it. Quite often it seems that shit just happens, and sooner or later everyone picks it up. Maybe what I said to Steve in our last conversation was true. That my one-time cheating episode was my end your marriage to a man who won't be a good father card. I thought Steve was the perfect man in our perfect marriage, but there were no serious checks. And when did the check happen? He failed. Until I met Mark and spent some time with him, I never knew how exciting spending time with a man could be. Until then, I never realized how tough and unforgiving Steve was, or what an inconsiderate lover Steve was, or at least I didn't consciously realize it all. So, was my cheating episode my subconscious's way of freeing me from this marriage? Or was it God's plan for me to find out what it's like to have an unrelenting spouse, so that I appreciate my second husband better and understand what can be lost if I never forgive anything? I regret cheating on Steve every day. I wish I hadn't dealt such a terrible blow to our marriage. I wish Steve was a little more understanding. If he had stayed, I would have done everything to make him happy. And I mean anything. But what was done. And it was at the next stage, which we moved on to from now on, that Steve failed. Or did I fail? But I would never have understood Steve's true nature if I hadn't made my terrible mistake. And once we had children, it would be too painful to break up. And I wouldn't have the life that Fred and I and our kids have now. Did my first marriage have to break up in order to understand all this? Maybe my cheating episode was supposed to be a chance for Steve to learn, grow, and overcome all the bad things that can happen in life. His chance to learn forgiveness? At least a little indulgence to keep a good marriage and life together? But he ruined everything. Without the ability to forgive, I don't think any of us will last long in this world. Steve couldn't. If these were lessons that we were all destined to learn, I wish it wouldn't be so painful. And it ended badly for Steve. But we can all wish for whatever we want. God has His own plans for us. We may not like it, but we have to learn from it. I don't know. What I do know is that when my husband, Fred, came home from a long trip, I saw that something was wrong. He admitted that he slept with another woman on the trip. I hugged him and said, "Good. I understand how this can happen. We will find out what is wrong between us, what caused this, and we will fix it. We'll figure it out." It took some time, but much less than you might think. Hurt feelings? We had a truckload of all this stuff to deal with, just like anyone else in a similar situation. But we met the problems face to face. Together. We had to turn to a family counselor to help us deal with this. But even in the most difficult moment, we didn't even think to say the word divorce. Our children never knew about our problems. We have kept our marriage and our family intact, and we have built a stronger, even more committed relationship than before. And it was good that we did, because life doesn't end for us until we're in the grave. And over the years, we've faced many more life trials. Financial issues, work matters, diseases, temptation from others, for both of us, problems with children as they grow up. We both made mistakes, but we forgave each other and moved on. And that's what we taught our children as much as we could. You're human. You're going to make mistakes and make bad decisions. You can hurt others, intentionally or unintentionally, and others will hurt you. The only saving grace, directly from God, is forgiveness. Fred and I have survived all the trials of life. Together, we have built a wonderful life for ourselves and our children. Perfection or forgiveness. As human beings, we cannot be perfect. And even if we could, I suspect it wouldn't suit us very well. And the pursuit of this leads only to destruction. So thank God for forgiveness. You can have anything you want. The only thing that limits us in forgiveness is ourselves. End. Note at the end. It was the true story of a very dear friend. When it all blew up, believe it or not, even the most judgmental of us were glad to see Steve leave Sarah. No one could stand this guy, and no one was surprised that she cheated on him with the first man who came along, who showed that her life could be better. In part, all this was due to the fact that Sarah got married so young. She didn't know that life and marriage could be any different, but it was a calculated move on Steve's part. This idiot decided that he could command her, humiliate her at every turn, and she had to put up with it. We all used to say, the only reason he got married was so he could have someone to criticize who couldn't just walk away from him. This guy was the worst of assholes. So, my dears, whether you are husband or wife, remember this lesson. If you constantly belittle your spouse, Do not be surprised when one day some random acquaintance will appear and show them that life does not necessarily have to be a meaningless pursuit of unattainable perfection. And for God's sake, what if your significant other makes the same mistake? Before you walk out the door, think about looking in the mirror and asking yourself, why was I cheated on? Was it me? Especially if the other half shows true remorse for their actions. Without forgiveness, none of us will last long, and we will never know true happiness. I know it won't be easy for many to swallow this pill, but you know what? No one ever said that life would be easy, did they? But it might be worth it if we're willing to make it worth it. Be kind to each other. With love, Amber.